All right, so welcome to the very first episode of our new interview series. My guest is Chelsea Russo. Chelsea is a social worker with Anthony F. Russo and Associates, specializing in estate, Medicaid, and long-term care planning. I'm especially excited about today's episode because I feel like while most people have an understanding of what social workers do, I'm not sure many truly understand what a social worker does in the context of applying for Medicaid. So welcome to the episode, Chelsea Russo.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it. So you did it. You did an excellent job with your video a few weeks ago about talking about long-term care, and I thought that this would be a really good kind of intro into what I do and how we can help your clients.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's that video got a lot of good feedback, and you had reached out, which was funny because I was thinking about maybe getting in touch with you to kind of go over that. So
Sure.
thanks for beating me to the punch. So I guess what a lot of my clients kind of are trying to understand, and even me to some extent, is what exactly does a social worker do in the context of trying to plan for long-term care, elder law planning, and then qualifying for Medicaid?
Sure, absolutely. So, social work is such a broad field. There are social workers in so many different institutions. What I do specifically for the firm is I'm really kind of the go-to person when it comes to applying for Medicaid, any kind of placement of home care services, nursing home, assisted living, anything along the spectrum of needing some form of long-term care. So, what I do, and social workers in general, my background is primarily in medical social work. So I work in
Okay.
hospitals, dialysis centers, nursing homes. And basically, the goal of a medical social worker is to try to help people who are going through health crisis or through a chronic condition and help them navigate the system. So that's really kind of at the bottom line of what I do in the firm. And it was funny while I was working in a lot of those uh, different areas, I would get phone calls from the firm saying, because this is a family firm. So, having them giving me a call and saying, listen, I have this client and they need some help at home. Who do I refer? What do I do? And that kind of has, it was an idea, a light bulb that kind of went off in both of our heads saying, wait a second, this might be something that your clients could really benefit from, of having somebody here to really walk them through this process and hold their hand through it.
Interesting. So it seems like you have the expertise to kind of work on both ends because you had the experience to work inside of the facilities and kind of get that care, and then now
Mhm.
you're kind of on the other end to kind of help the clients get into those facilities to get that
Absolutely.
care. Okay, interesting.
And
So I'm sorry, go on.
yeah, no. So in terms of the nice thing is that I was primarily responsible in a lot of those different settings. Was, somebody who needed to be discharged home, I was the person that helps coordinate those benefits or coordinate, you need certain equipment in the home. So having that knowledge has really helped in this situation when clients are meeting, social workers or people in these healthcare settings, making sure that they know their rights, knowing what to advocate for, and really understanding this is how these benefits will actually help you in the community, because a lot of people have these lofty goals of let's just apply for Medicaid, but it doesn't always get broken down of this is how this could actually benefit you when you're in the community based on your health situation and your financial situation.
Interesting. So would you say that you work more on trying to help clients qualify for home health care, or is it assisted living, or is it a nursing home, or is it just kind of one and is it the same, or it's kind of no difference?
So there are two different, and I know you have clients kind of throughout the United States,
Sure.
but in New York State
Hmm.
specifically, there are two different types of Medicaid. There is community-based Medicaid and there is nursing home Medicaid. What I do is I help apply for both of those types of care. And believe it or not, assisted living actually falls under the community Medicaid guidelines. So if you find a facility that does take community Medicaid, we would be basically doing a community Medicaid application. And then those who require more advanced medical care, then I'm doing a nursing home Medicaid application. Most frequently, our firm, we see community Medicaid applicants, obviously, because I know the goal is to remain at home for as long as humanly possible.
Right.
So we try to obviously meet those expectations and help clients do that. And one of the biggest things that we could always advocate for is making sure you do that earlier rather than later, not waiting for the crisis to happen. So we try to make sure that we get, a good amount of people to try to stay home for as long as we can make it work for them medically and obviously for their, family situation as well.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, the goal is to stay home. That's what everyone kind of says. And I mean, most
Yeah.
of my clients tell me if they need to go into a home that they're going to drive off a cliff and things like that, which is seriously conversations that I have. Or, my wife will put the pillow over my head, which I say she may
Understood.
do that anyway. But so obviously you've got that. So assisted living and home healthcare kind of fall under the same purview, and then if you need to go into an actual facility,
Mhm.
then that's something separate. Okay, that's
Correct.
I think a good distinction, which a lot of people kind of get confused about.
Yeah.
So now, in terms of trying to qualify for these services,
Mm.
when should a person realize or start to kind of think about hiring you or hiring a social worker or a firm to kind of help with these things? I know it's kind
Yeah.
of, you have the worst case scenarios where you have a loved one at home who, kind of cognitively is losing their ability to kind of function and do things on their
Mhm.
own. So that's kind of evident. But at what point do they kind of look to work with you?
So it's a fine line, and obviously everybody's medical situation is going to be a little bit different. And that's why having a medical social worker with experience is helpful, just because I do have some knowledge of disease process and sort of where we should kind of start in the continuum. But basically, typically, what a good indicator of if you need Medicaid requires when they're going to send help into your home, they require that you need hands-on assistance. So what that means is it's not the just the cooking and the cleaning and maybe some light laundry. It's you need hands-on assistance to do at least one, if not multiple, what's called activities of daily living. So you have to be, do you need help basically walking? Do you need assistance, getting in and out of the bathroom? Do you need assistance getting dressed? Things where somebody would have to physically, put their hands on you to help you. That's the difference. And that's also a lot of people talk about companion care versus aids. That's the difference. So companion care is somebody that can't really touch you or put their hands on you. They can assist you with daily tasks in your home, but they're not going to be able to help you in the shower, that type of thing. So community-based Medicaid, at this juncture, because they're always trying to evaluate and change these rules, but as of right now in New York State, you need to require somebody to physically assist you with an activity of daily living.
Okay, so, and that's another common question that I get a lot. Can it be a family member taking care of you at home? Does
Yeah.
it need to be a licensed nurse or, from a actual agency? Or
Mhm.
can I just get like that, it's kind of like a volunteer to come in and just kind of, help out and
Mhm.
provide company, right?
Well, so the companion side of things, Medicaid unfortunately is not going to cover in any
Right,
way. So
right,
that you would have to, but you absolutely under the community Medicaid guidelines, there is a program that's called the Consumer Directed Aid Program, and you may hear these like jingles on the radio or some commercials that are out there. But basically, you can get family members or somebody that you've met that may not have the proper certification. They can provide you with direct care under the Medicaid program, and they get paid through Medicaid. So, a lot of my clients will have, either a live-in family member or a granddaughter or somebody who's going to nursing school that they've met in the process and they want that person to care for them. You're allowed to bring your own aides on into that program. There are some, obviously regulations. You can't work overtime. You need to have,
right.
obviously the appropriate immigration status where you have to have a visa in order to work. You also can't be on disability yourself, those types of things. But if that individual is available, you can absolutely have family take care of you.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know because I know that
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a very confusing thing out there. And then if you
Hmm.
have long-term care insurance, there are different rules than what Medicaid kind of has. So
Yes,
won't get
exactly.
into that here, but that's I guess where it gets somewhat confusing. All
Sure.
right, so that's kind of when those things happen. But when you kind of see that you need help, what
Hmm.
is the process? Do they just set up a meeting, or what does the process look like? What is the
Absolutely.
timeline? What is
Sure.
involved?
Hmm. So typically, it's going to depend on not only your medical circumstance, but also your financial is something that's important as well. So uh, typically, just to go over just some brief guidelines, I don't want to spit a bunch of numbers out at you, but
Sure.
basically, for community-based Medicaid right now, you can have $30,000 in the bank if you're a single individual. If you're married, you can have approximately about 40,000 in the bank. And there are a lot of non-exempt assets that I know you and I are going to kind of talk about a little bit later.
Sure.
So that's not, not always the totality of what you should have, but basically things that are considered, non-exempt assets, you can have a total of 30 or 40 if you're married. Um, in terms of what the process would be is if you came to us and you said, listen, I have excess assets there, that's fine. The only thing is that you would be in a circumstance in which we would have to do some advanced planning for you. So you may want to meet with one of the attorneys and go over, okay, this is, trusts, exempt gifting, that kind of thing, where they would go over all of your basically your assets and, plan for them. If you, let's just say, are eligible or you did your previous estate planning, then it's contact the office. And what we do is we're going to say to you, okay, please come in. We always offer a free consultation. You can sit with myself or one of the attorneys. And basically, we go over these are your assets. This is what the program looks like and how it could benefit for you. This is your health circumstances and why it would be helpful.
Right.
And we are unfortunately going to ask for a lot of documentation up front. And what happens is we go through that documentation, we make sure that we put together the most complete file as possible. And then, at that point, we say, okay, we're ready. So if you start to notice, typically in where we are, and it's going to range from county to county, but usually for community Medicaid application, we tell people, budget at least 3 to 4 months
Okay.
from the date of application to when the aids come in. There are expedited options, and a lot of the counties are moving faster than that. But
Right.
just in your head, it's always a good idea to kind of give a little bit more cushion on either side. I've had people who are getting care in 6 weeks, but we just want to make sure that, people are expecting that period of time. So it's not always that, like I mentioned earlier, it would be best if you kind of start this process maybe even a little ahead of when you think
Sure.
you're going to start to need the care, especially if there's estate planning that needs to be done,
Sure.
um, because that's actually going to be one of the major changes. In the near future, they're going to be instituting a look back period in New York State for community-based Medicaid, which
Right.
has never been the case.
Okay, so I kind of want to go there for a second. So at the
Yeah,
look back, most people kind of, well, I don't know. I'm not going to say most people, but some people understand that there's a 5 year look back, and that really applies to if you're going into a nursing home, right?
correct.
And
Correct.
then what that means is essentially if you moved assets within a 5 year period of time and you needed to go into a nursing home, the assets would be reverted back before the transfer, right?
So
Are we thinking
how
about that correctly?
Yes, absolutely, pretty much. For what
Okay.
happens is that nursing home care, you're 100% right. They're going to take a look and have you given anything away, sold anything for less than fair market value, or transferred anything into a trust.
Right.
If that's in fact the case, then what they do is the way that it's not a matter of you get the assets back at that point. What they do is they say, okay, we're going to determine what's called a period of ineligibility. So the easiest way to think about this is they take the amount of money that you transferred and they divide it by the standard cost of nursing home care in your county. And just for a general, it spans in different counties, but approximately about $13,000 we'll use.
Right.
So for every $13,000 you give away, that's 1 month
Well, okay.
that nursing home care is not going to be covered by
Yep.
Medicaid.
That makes
So they
sense.
don't want your stuff. They don't want you to give
Right.
back money. They don't want your house. They don't want any of that. They just are going to say, we're not kicking in until
Until that
this
exclusion
period
period.
expend.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. And then
Exactly.
I think where the real confusion comes in is ironically in New York, where it's impossible to do anything. New York for home health care is actually advantageous, right? Because right now
Absolutely.
there's no look back or it's basically 3 months. I mean,
It's
where are
actually
we?
so the 3 months is a misconception that's out
Okay.
there. Medicaid will actually retroactively pay up to 3 months in terms of your eligibility.
Okay.
That gets a little complicated when we're talking about home care, but if you had, let's say you were financially eligible and you had this very large hospital bill,
Right.
right? And you can't pay that hospital bill, if you were financially eligible 90 days ago and you submit proof of that, then they'll retroactively pay a bill up to 90 days. So that's where
Okay.
3 months gets thrown in.
Okay.
But as of right now, what Medicaid does is they take a snapshot on the first of the month. If you're eligible on that snapshot, so right now we're in June. If I submit my assets and as of July 1st, my assets are I'm under their thresholds, I'm eligible. So what will happen is they will activate care as of July 1st. And so
Okay.
there is no look back period for community Medicaid currently.
Currently, but aren't, I mean, I know they've been talking about changing that to 2.5 years for like the
Yes.
past, before the pandemic, really, right? And
Correct.
and
Yeah,
that's gotten
that
pushed
was the
back.
issue. Yeah,
Right.
so because of the fact that there was the pandemic, you can't make insurance harder to obtain during a state of emergency.
Right. Okay.
So the earliest that they could possibly do any form of look back would be the quarter after the state of emergency ends, which as of right now, that would be, what they're saying is their look back, they pushed it and they're saying April 2024. There is a possibility that continues to get kicked down the road a little bit. But we're getting closer to, based on what everybody is saying at this point in the community we're getting closer to this actually becoming a look back that's going to be enforced.
Right. So essentially, if people feel like they are going to need it or they're close, then they should kind of jump on it right away. So we're not
Absolutely.
up against that. We've got 2.5
Yeah.
years. And would
Yeah.
that work the same way where you take a certain amount of money divided by the assets and that's the amount of
Yes.
months that you have to wait?
Exactly.
Okay.
So they haven't we're assuming that they're definitely going to be using the same formula. As of right now, most experts are using the same number. So the nursing home number, that 13,000, they're
Oh,
using
really?
the same
Okay.
number for penalty. We're hoping that that's the case because you'll actually be eligible sooner if it's a
Yes.
larger number.
Right.
But we haven't really gotten any confirmed, that this is definitely the number that they're going to be utilizing. But it's the same formula that they'll definitely be using.
Okay, interesting. So now,
Yeah.
so I guess where I come into play is, I work with a lot of folks who are transitioning into retirement or in retirement who have accumulated assets who've done well for themselves.
Yeah.
So a lot of the conversations that I have, which I'm kind of laughing because every single person I talk to kind of says the same thing. Well,
Yeah.
but Joe, we've got more than I have too much money to even bother with this. And I tell them, well, that's not really true because there's a lot of different planning techniques and things that we could do where we should be doing them, 5 to 10 years out. It's like that favorite John
Right.
F. Kennedy quote, like the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. Although
Exactly.
if I went up on the roof, I'd probably fall off. So I might have to hire someone. But no, but so, you kind of want to plan before things get bad. So while you're still healthy and
Absolutely.
things, that's where you kind of do the more of the estate planning part where you meet with an attorney, an elderly care specialist, or estate planning specialist.
Mhm.
But now, we're kind of talking about the social work side where either we've done the planning or we haven't done the planning, and
Right.
now our loved one needs help or you need help.
Yes.
So if you have assets, is this a worthwhile cause? Do I need to just,
Mhm.
basically I'm on the poverty line before I get coverage? So
Yeah.
how should they approach this?
So really, and I'll go through both scenarios. So
Okay.
if you are just entering retirement right now, estate planning is always going to be a good idea.
Sure.
Just even, having a power of attorney,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not obviously not going to give you sob stories or anything like that, but
Right.
just based on what I've dealt with, especially in recent years, for whatever reason, we're seeing people who are very young have very tragic circumstances happen.
Sure.
So it's always a good idea to have some kind of backup with planning or something along those lines. So that's always going to be something I advocate for. However, I do understand it's a hard topic to talk about and to conceptualize.
Yeah.
And, who knows what my, 20-year-old child is going to be in 10 years?
Right.
Will they be able to take care of all of these things? I completely understand that that's not, an easy thought process. So we have plenty of clients that kind of stick their heads in the sand and say,
Yeah.
you know what, I'm not dealing with this. And if that's the case, still, there's no reason for you to completely ignore this process completely. We have plenty of people that come to us in crisis. And that's sort of where I come in. And what we do, unfortunately, they probably spend some money that they don't need to.
Right.
But we are able to typically get them approval a lot faster than if they were to just say, okay, I'm going to spend down every single one of my assets. And especially for married couples, that's the other thing that I always will, recommend. When there's a married couple, you have an escape hatch because transfers between spouses are not, going to trigger that look back period. So, if I need nursing home care, I can transfer all of my excess assets to my husband, have him sign something that's called a spousal refusal, and then I'm eligible in both scenarios, nursing home care or community Medicaid. So there are a lot of these things that are out there.
Okay,
We
so
can.
I want to stop you there for a second because
Sure.
I think that's really important. So if
Mhm.
you're single, it's a little bit different. But if you are
Yeah.
married and you do that spousal refusal,
Mhm.
what a really popular question that comes up is that a taxable event? Does that create tax issues? Is that a gift? What is the negative? What is the downside of doing that if there is one?
Yeah. So, I mean, typically, and again, I'm not an accountant, so I
Right.
can't give you
Yes.
100% in terms of, and it's also, I know it's going to depend on the type of asset that you have.
Right.
So, annuities are going to kind of throw a whole
Well,
different,
that's
spin on
yeah,
things.
yeah. And
But in
annuities are
terms,
yeah.
yeah, my feelings on annuities. But
Yeah,
anyway,
we'll get into that a little bit later, but
yeah,
annuities are kind of the well. Anyway,
yeah,
we'll get to that
we'll
in a
get there.
second. But yeah, so like
So
if you do it from a spouse to spouse, typically it's not considered a taxable event, right?
typically not. Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
I've had situations in which, and also to be quite honest with you, a majority of my clients are coming into me where they're joint account owners anyway.
Right.
So we're essentially just kind of creating a new account where one spouse is removing themselves, or we're just removing the name from the account. So
Okay.
in that situation, I have not had anybody report back to me. Obviously, good idea to consult with an accountant, but in terms of our impact, I haven't seen anything like that. Again, aside from some of these other more complex investment strategies, but in terms of the day to day, I'm taking my name off my checking account or I'm taking my name off my savings account. We typically haven't had any issues like that.
Okay, so if you're a client, you're worth a few $1 million, you've got a house, if you live on Long Island, your house is probably a huge percentage of your net worth. You probably got 401k plans or
Mm-hmm.
403b plans if you're a teacher, and then you've got, joint accounts, investment accounts, what have you that are what we call non retirement accounts, not IRAs,
Mm-hmm.
not 401ks, not 403bs. So you have those assets. So you have a couple $1 million, you kind of figure that out. So let's get to kind of the biggest asset of the home. If you haven't done any other planning and the home is just still owned jointly, and
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to qualify for home health care, so how is the house treated?
So the house is actually your primary residence is considered exempt.
Hmm.
And while that seems like a very benevolent thing that Medicaid would do, they do it for a very specific reason. After you and your spouse pass away, they do have the ability to assert an estate recovery claim for the amount of money that was paid
Okay.
on your behalf through Medicaid. And typically, those and the way they are able to do that is through assets that go through the process of probate.
Hmm.
So your home is one of those major assets that you can't put a beneficiary on. So if you
Right.
do absolutely nothing and you just own your home individually, it's going to go through that process. So that's how Medicaid's going to get their money back.
Yep.
Um,
Okay.
but we're going to weigh the situation there, right? So we're going to determine and we're going to say, okay, two spouses, we want to get community-based Medicaid. You know what? Maybe it's worth the gamble. Maybe this is just you're just starting out, you're not really in true medical crisis. 5 years at home would make sense. There is a possibility of that. And if it's before this look back period that starts with community Medicaid, maybe we do an irrevocable trust
Right.
at that point.
Transfer it to the yes.
Transfer it to a trust so that it protects it from
Hmm.
that estate recovery lien. Or, some people will say, you know what? Based on my health circumstances, I have, a vascular dementia that's very fast moving. I have, a very aggressive form of cancer. I don't think this is a possibility of 5 years being at home,
Right.
just realistically. Then at that point, maybe it's a transfer to a spouse, or there are also other exempt individuals that you can transfer to. So people who have anyone with a disability, anybody that has been what's called a caretaker child. So if your child resides with you for 2 years prior to you needing institutionalization, you can transfer your house penalty free. Tax implications there, obviously,
Sure.
but you may be in a situation where that might be worth it. Obviously, saving the house from a recovery lien, maybe
Right.
taxes. be such a
So would
huge
the
change.
house still fall under the same 5-year look back purview, or would it fall under it the 2.5 years if you just stayed at home and were only getting, you know, Medicaid home
So
health care?
yeah, so a transfer of the house to a trust is going to trigger a look back. So whether that's the 2.5 year for home or the 5 year for
Right.
nursing
Okay.
home care, it's going to get triggered anytime
Sure.
you transfer a house outside of those exempt people. So caretaker child, a
Right.
disabled individual,
Right.
or your spouse, those people, it's not a problem. But everybody above and beyond that, it will most likely trigger an issue.
Okay.
So that will, it's something that we kind of have to weigh. And unfortunately, there is a gamble that we have to take to say, all right, do we want to try to protect the house? Or, if people come into us and the house is their only asset, we sometimes say, well, we're taking you from eligible to not. And
Okay.
and you're going to have to come out of pocket for your care, which is going to be exorbitantly expensive. So
Okay. Yep.
everybody's situation there's a lot of nuance to this, definitely.
Sure. All right. So I want to rattle off kind of 3 or 4 really popular assets
Okay.
and how they're treated. So the first one is 401k plans, IRA accounts, Roth IRA accounts. So if
Yes.
you have an IRA account that's not an annuity, so
Hmm.
I'm gonna preface that. It's just
Okay.
in like a Schwab account, I'm a Fidelity account, it's at, wherever it's at. And you are in RMD status, which means you are well right now it's age 73, or you were young, you're older and you started at 70 and a half, but you're in R&D status and your
Mhm.
401k plan, your IRAs, you're having to do required minimum distributions.
Yes.
What can Medicaid go after and what is
Hmm.
protected in
Okay.
in that scenario?
So in terms of going after Medicaid, anything that just to kind of differentiate, Medicaid's not going to go after anything during your lifetime. They don't want your stuff when you're alive.
Okay.
They basically, what they're going to do though is when they're determining your eligibility, they're going to assess, okay, you have this 401k, you have a 403b, you're taking distributions. If you're a married individual and those distributions are coming out as per the IRS table, then that principal of that asset is considered exempt. They're
Right.
not going to count your $200,000, $300,000 that's in the
Mm-hmm.
IRA. What they will count is the RMD as your incomes, because
Yep.
Medicaid, they assess income and assets separately. A lot of people think of it in terms of the IRS, where it's like, oh, this is my gross income, this is my asset. That's not the way Medicaid does it. They
Okay.
separate the two. They say, what's your income? What are your streams that are coming in? Social Security, pension, IRA distributions, that sort of thing. And then what are my, non-exempt assets that we're
Okay.
counting? So an IRA that's getting distributions is considered exempt. The one thing I'm going to preface that is that if you are a single individual,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be able to use the IRS table. So Medicaid wants you to maximize your distribution. And the reason
Okay.
they do that is because they want you to increase your income,
Okay.
right? They want your income to be as high as they deem is appropriate. So they have a different actuary table.
Okay.
So you're going to have to follow their actuary table.
Which I'm
And
assuming is
then
not in, which is in their benefit, not in yours, correct?
correct,
Okay,
right. So
that's
you're
what
going
I
to be
figured.
pulling a little bit more out of
Sure.
your IRA, but there is a workaround where we can talk a little bit about income protection if you want. I don't know how specific you want to get into that, but in terms of your income is in community Medicaid situations is never going to be a reason why you're going to be denied. You will always be approved regardless of what your income is. If you're pulling in an astronomical income, there's this cost
Interesting.
benefit analysis we can do to determine. What they do is they approve you with something that's called an overage or a spend down.
Okay.
Okay, you may have heard that term
Yes.
thrown around. So the overage, basically, Medicaid says you can pay us your overage, which people with these very high numbers are not going to do, obviously, or you can set something up called a pooled income trust. Now, it has the word trust, but I don't want you to think of it like an irrevocable trust or
Okay.
anything like that. This is something we only set up in the event that you're applying for community-based Medicaid. So this
Okay.
is set up at the time of your community Medicaid application. And this is also unfortunately not available in all states. New York is one of them that allows it. And what happens is your income on a monthly basis, for right now, a single individual is allowed to make $1,700. Everything above that $1,700 goes into this pooled income trust account. Think of it
Okay.
almost like a separate checking account that I don't have direct access to.
Okay.
Okay. But I can submit my expenses to it. So I am applying for community Medicaid. I have $2,700 in income. I'm $1,000 over the guideline. Each month, my income comes in exactly the same as it always has through my direct deposits. And I'm going to transfer into this new account that we set up for you $1,000. And then I'm going to submit $1,000 of expenses that have to be that are on my behalf. So my utilities, my credit card bill where I buy my groceries, anything that has to do with my quality of life, believe it or not. So I want to buy a new TV, I want to buy new furniture, anything like that can be submitted to this pool trust, and they will cut checks directly to basically the third party. So they'll pay a Visa bill, they'll pay PSEG, they'll pay any of these utilities that I request them to do. So that's a way that we get, income, we get the Medicaid, and then you also get access to your income. You're
Okay.
not just forfeiting it over.
Is that just predominantly used for single individuals, or do you do that for married as well?
I do for married as well. So
Okay.
it depends. I don't have a ton of married couples that apply together. The reasoning behind that
Right.
is usually you have one that's, a
Right.
little bit more healthy,
Mm-hmm.
and also there's some financial benefits where if we're doing a spousal refusal, if I'm the,
Right.
homemaker that makes $700 in Social Security and my husband makes close to 3,000, it probably makes financial sense to have him do a spousal refusal and have me just be the one who receives Medicaid.
Right. Right.
But if you both require care, which I do have clients where that's the case, we can absolutely do one for both of you. That's not an issue.
Okay. And then who manages the pooled income trust? Like who's in charge of all of the, submitting the bills, funding the
Mhm.
accounts?
Right.
How does that work?
So, um, typically very unlucky children. But no, what happens is that
So my
there are
brother would be the one doing it.
exactly right.
Okay, good. All right.
And we can put that in the will.
Yeah,
But no,
perfect.
what happens is that it's really not that bad. I have to be honest. So what happens is that there is going to be a trustee. So there are different companies that are out there that manage these trusts. So
Okay.
they say, okay, who is the person who's going to manage? You are able to elect that person. So it may be yourself. I have plenty of clients who are saying, no, I'm the one who's going to,
Okay.
submit and pay my bills. I'm going to put my son on here too, just in case I need a little bit of help. And anyone is allowed to submit these bills on my behalf if I need to. Typically, the transfer, it's a one-time thing. We set up an ACH,
Mm-hmm.
out of the account, it goes to the pool trust, and that's done. And then the bills, depending on what you're having them pay, if it's something that's on auto pay, a lot of the pool trusts will say, okay, just show me proof that this is going to be the same expense every month. I'm just going to pay it for you if you request that. Other ones have credit cards that they'll actually give you almost like a debit
Okay.
card that you can swipe. So there are convenience factors. All of them have online, banking type of thing. So there's a lot of advancements that have happened with those accounts as
Now,
opposed to
what if
what they
you're
used to be.
single with no children, don't really have any family? Can you
Mhm.
hire an outside trust company to do this for you? Or at
So
that point, do you really not even care what happens to your assets? Because, unless you have a
so
charity, there's not,
right,
whatever it
right.
is, it is.
Right. So that's typically the answer most people will give. There are some accountants that are out there that will also do
Okay.
this as well. So you can kind of pay them
Pay them to
to
do it.
submit your expenses. And typically the pool trust, I don't think they would take that on because it's a conflict of interest issue.
Okay.
So typically they'll say, okay, here's a name to, kind of get accountant or somebody to handle this for you.
Okay. All right, so we kind of went through the IRA.
Sorry.
So no,
Yeah.
no, that's perfect. So my follow-up question to that is, what if you have an IRA that's you're not in required minimum distribution status? You're 65 years old,
Yeah.
you just kind of, you're that age, you've got all these assets in there, but you're not taking distributions.
Mhm.
Is the principal still exempt, or do you have to wait until you're 73 or 75, depending on where the age limit is for the principal to be exempt?
You can start as per Medicaid, you can start initiating distributions
Okay.
when we put in the community Medicaid application. So as long as
Okay.
I'm showing, look, here's proof of the distribution that we requested. Now, I know, some of these IRAs, you have to kind of jump through hoops to show that you have disabilities, or you have to, that type of thing. So that side of it, I know, is not the easiest thing. So I don't want to simplify it, but in terms of for community Medicaid benefits or for nursing home benefits, they say as long as you're taking distributions, at the time of your application, that's fine. We'll consider the principal exempt.
And I would assume that they have their own distribution life expectancy tables that they want you to use in that case.
Yes, so
Okay.
they'll give me, okay, I know IRS starts at 73 here. This, goes from
Right.
50. I think it starts at 50 or something like that. So
Okay.
they'll give
So,
that
all
to you.
right. So to recap, with 401ks, IRAs, those assets are good assets there because you can typically make the principal exempt if you're doing a form of a distribution. And then I would also caveat with a Roth IRA because they do
Yes.
not have mandatory distributions,
Right.
but in the same token, if you take distributions following their charts, then that's cool as well, I would imagine.
So they actually brought, you would think in theory, yes, that would
Okay.
be fine. They sometimes give you a little bit of because the asset is completely accessible. That's sort of their like line in the sand.
Okay.
I understand retirement, it's accessible, obviously, but because of the fact that it's already been taxed, it's almost like they treat that as money in the bank. Um, there are decisions out there about the Roths, and I know we're gonna talk about annuities. Kind of sadly, what is in practice and what is in the books are not always,
Right.
kind of. So
Right.
to us, we sometimes will say, listen, we know that this is going to cause an issue, and especially with a Roth when it's already been taxed, we kind of say, is this worth it to you? Can we put this in, a trust, or can we, would you withdraw and put this into, a different type of high yield account or something like that,
Okay. So you
just to
take a
avoid the fight,
distribution from the Roth. Right.
Right,
Right. Take a
exactly.
gross.
So
Okay.
at
That's
that
good to know.
point, we sometimes will turn around and say, academically, yes, I understand what you're saying. The distributions would be the same under that table,
Right.
but
In
they do
practicality,
have
they're not.
exactly.
Okay. All right. So that's that. One, I mean, and two other ones, which I'm going to get into. Actually, three. So the second one is life insurance. So life
Mhm.
insurance gets kind of confusing because I believe if you have term insurance, there's no value. So really, when you're looking at Medicaid, they look at the actual value of cash or the value of the policy while you're still living, other than the death benefit. Correct?
That's correct, 100%. So death benefit is never going to be an issue. It's going to be the cash value that's associated with
Right.
that
And isn't
account.
there like if you have over a certain amount of cash value, so if you have a lower, so if you have what is it, less than $1,500 or
It's
something?
exactly right. Yes. So it's $1,500. Now that's one policy with $1,500. So like you get like an exemption of
It's
fifteen hundred
so
dollars.
it's
So
1,500
if you
total.
Right, right. So if
Okay.
you have, six policies and the cash value is 1,500, they're going to only count one of them.
Right.
Basically, they're only going to exempt one of them.
Right. So one popular strategy is if you have, whole life insurance, universal life contracts that have a lot of cash value, is to take loans against them, right? Because if you take a loan,
You can
how do
either
they
do
view
that.
that?
The loan, as long as it's going to provide a reduction of the cash value,
Hmm.
that's fine. People will take distributions. The other thing that people will do is they'll transfer ownership. If it's a good policy, they can transfer the ownership of the policy. The only issue that you run into there is that it's the new owners paying those premiums, obviously.
Okay.
So that's the one thing
So
to
you
just
can
be aware
transfer
of.
ownership. And right now, that doesn't fall under the look back purview, right? But
For community Medicaid, you can do that immediately.
right.
But obviously, once these changes happen, it
Right, two
will
and a half
count.
years. Right.
Yeah,
Right. Okay.
exactly.
So you can do that.
But you're gonna be in that spot really either way because you're pulling money out of
Right.
you're gonna cash out, you're gonna have to give it to either a trust or another person anyway. So it doesn't really,
Right.
one way or the other, if you want to keep the policy intact, ownership change is fine.
Right. Okay. Or if you preemptively do it, like you've got a ton of cash value, you could take a loan, like when you're young, so that you kind of get through that look back period.
Yeah,
The other thing too, which I wanted to bring up, the beneficiaries on the life insurance is extremely important, right? Because if you do not,
absolutely.
if by accident it goes to the estate, then that asset could be subject to probate, right? Based on the same
Correct.
thing. Okay. Okay.
Exactly right. And same thing with your IRAs.
Right.
I can't tell you, unfortunately, how many people where, oh, it's been my spouse for 50 years, so I just forgot. And that, unfortunately, that spouse predeceased them.
Okay.
So really important beneficiaries. One thing we always stress is beneficiaries and powers of attorney are probably the most important things that you
Yep.
can, keep up to date.
Agreed. Agreed there. All right. So we got through those two. Now, just joint checking account, savings account,
Mhm.
just regular investment accounts. Is there any way to convert those to exempt assets, or they just are what they are and they're
They
going to
are
be
what they
included?
are. They are what they are. Typically, when we have people who do advanced planning and they come in and they do their irrevocable trusts and get everything all settled, we usually tell people, listen, we understand you have to live your life here. We're not going to get you your
Right.
$30,000 and live that way for the next 20 years. We
Right.
understand that that's not realistic. So we kind of will talk to families and say, what's the number that you're comfortable leaving out there and understanding that that's the vulnerable amount. You know what I mean? That's the amount that probably would have to get spent in that event. Everybody has a different answer to that. Some people say
Right.
50, some people say 100, some people say whatever it is. But typically, a lot of people, and I know this isn't, my specific area of expertise, but just to kind of give your clients some ease to their concern, you do have access in a roundabout way through irrevocable trust funds, the way that typically most attorneys will write them. Where as
Right.
long as you trust your trustees, as long as you trust the people who are taking care of things, you
Right.
do have access to those funds if necessary. So that's something that some people will say, all right, well then I'm just going to get down to the 30 because I'll have access to this if I need to. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it all
Exactly.
depends on your risk tolerance.
Okay, but assuming you didn't do that planning and
Mhm.
now you're at the point where we need to file the application or trying
Yeah.
to get it, then those assets are going to be included. They're not going to be exempt assets really
The
in any
only
way.
thing, the only thing you could ever transfer is somebody who is disabled, either
Okay.
to them directly or to a trust for their benefit. So if you have a disabled child or a family member, you are able to transfer assets to them.
Okay.
And then at that point, Medicaid will allow that. We just have to obviously provide proof of that person's disability, and it has to be, kind of federally that they're considered disabled. And once we provide that, then Medicaid will say those are fine, but unfortunately, with somebody without that circumstance, there's no way to kind of, if you waited, there's really no way to kind of avoid, unfortunately, Medicaid counting those.
Okay. All right. Now we saved the best for last. So annuities. And I'm going to caveat by saying this: annuities that have not been annuitized, meaning you have not given the insurance company a sum of money, and in that
Mhm.
term of money, you lose access to the money, but they provide you guaranteed income, very much in the same vein as a pension. I'm not
Right.
talking about that annuity, and you can specify why that's a good distinction. But any other annuities, and even annuities that are in IRAs,
Hmm.
they are the worst asset you could probably own for this type of planning. Is
For
that an
community for
overstatement?
Medicaid, no. It's
Okay.
I I have a personal loathing for them, but I'm going to
Yeah.
try to not make that
No, no,
apparent.
no, please do. I mean, we're here to be upfront and honest.
Yes.
They're a pain in the you know what, right?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, in terms of um I guess I'll rank in order of least terrible to
Okay.
most terrible, but
Right.
basically, the annuities that are held inside of IRAs, typically those qualified situations, they're not going to be considered, the principal is not going to be considered of that annuity. The reason why I don't love them is that annuities come with all these extra
Hmm.
little rules that are involved. So, say you're a single individual and you have to take more distribution than what the IRS is telling you or what the annuity company is telling you.
Hmm.
At that time, you have to go to this annuity company and say, okay, no, I don't need $2,000 a year. I need $8,000 a year. Give that to me. And there may be different rules or guaranteed benefits, or they may give you penalties or
Yep.
something like that. So that,
Yes.
while I dislike them, they're not the end of the world. Those particular ones are not the end of the world to me.
Okay.
um Really, everything else sort of just falls into, whether it be single premium or whatever fancy thing somebody tried to sell you at the bank. I don't even know at this point, but basically what happens is that any other annuity, if you have access to it, Medicaid has very, very complicated rules for how you can maintain an annuity. And one of just kind of the bottom line of that rule is that you have to make the beneficiary New York State, which is typically that's a no-brainer. Nobody wants to deal with that.
Right.
So most of
Right.
my clients will turn around and say to me, okay, I'm getting rid of this because
Right.
I don't want that to be the case. Um, Others now also to get a little bit more complicated, people who have had long-standing annuities and they want to maintain them, you can transfer annuities to an irrevocable trust. So some people will do that. Most annuity companies are very make that very difficult for you. Some will not even really read the trust. They're just going to send you a 1099,
Right.
which
It
is
becomes right. It becomes a taxable kind of event more often
in
than not, right?
not more often than not, but the issue is that if you have what's called a grantor trust where it's
Hmm.
not a complete gift, what happens is that the annuity can be transferred and it is not a taxable gift. But most annuity companies don't want to deal with you, so
Right.
they're just going to send you a 1099.
Right. They're not going to
And
pay
even
attention.
though
Right.
it may not have been a taxable event, so that's another issue that we have. And then on top of it, you have to come up with, Medicaid's going to say you also have to now annuitize this. If this is available
Right.
access, you have to now go annuitize and make me the beneficiary. So it's just
Right.
not
So,
great.
okay. So, if is it too late if you have annuities and we're starting the process, or do we just have to
Yeah.
make sure that we start taking or transfer them, taking distributions, moving
Mhm.
them to like regular investment accounts or something? Is it too late, or do we just need to make sure we do that before the application is sent in, for
So
lack of better terms?
typically the way that we will, a lot of people will come to us and they just have the single premium annuity that they've had forever that's just sitting there.
Right.
And then at that point we kind of make a judgment call and we say, listen, do you love this annuity? Is it doing anything for you anymore? Is it just sitting there at this point because you've
Right.
held it for so long? And 90% of the time that's really where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do is we say, okay, to avoid any kind of confusion on Medicaid's part, why don't we withdraw this? Because you typically, if you've held it for a certain period of time, you're outside of those penalties
The
that you
back
would
end
normally.
penalties. Yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So typically people will just pull it, and then obviously withhold. Understand that there's going to be whatever they think in terms of once they speak with their tax professional. But basically, we will then turn around and say, all right, um, put this into either a trust account that's just a regular, investment account or checking account or whatever
Right.
you want to put
Right.
it in. And that's typically the way most people will handle it. Others who are just really, just love the account. Um, I have to tell you, most people, we kind of just say this is not really,
Yeah.
it's not really worth the headache that's involved. Especially if you've saved all of this and now Medicaid is going to be the beneficiary, it just doesn't really make a ton of
Yeah, it's
sense.
not ideal. It's not. I
Yeah.
mean, unless someone loves the state, but I. Well, I'm not going to go there. But so yeah, so all right, cool. So as we wrap up, so this has been amazing. It's been great. So thank you so much for your time. But as
Sure.
we
Thank you for
wrap
having
up,
me.
so how do people hire you? Do you submit the application? What does that look like? So I come
Sure.
to you. I'm ready. I need help. We need
Mhm.
to apply for Medicaid. Are you actually doing all the paperwork? I mean, doing all
Yeah.
that for us?
Yes. Yes. So basically, what happens is that you're going to come in. Always offer a free consultation in the
Okay.
office. You come, you sit with us. We talk about, okay, what is it? What are your expectations in terms of the help that you're going to need, and also let's talk about the process. So we go through all of that. Just to be transparent and upfront in terms of just our pricing and how
Hmm.
we, kind of set this up. Usually the range of Medicaid applications, we start around 5,500 and then
Okay.
we end typically around 7,500. The
Okay.
$7,500 range is usually a nursing home Medicaid application. So you're dealing with that. If you need additional estate planning, that sort of thing, you deal with the attorneys on
Right.
that. There may
Right.
potentially be some extra fees that are involved.
Of course.
But we really do our best to try to not hit you over the head there.
Right. Right.
So basically what happens is you come to us, we sit down, we go over the specifics of this is how we're going to do it. I give you a checklist. This is all the information you need to provide. I contact your investment professionals if you
Right.
have them and say, listen, hi, I'm here. These are the assets that they're telling me. Would you be able to supply me with a current statement? These are the distributions we're going to have to take. And I try to create, relationships with those people because I know that they're trusted by the families. So from there, I then get all the documentation. I put the application in. I also will be getting physician forms completed, all of that. And depending on your circumstance, if you want care immediately, I'm going to be working on an expedited application,
Okay.
to try to get you that assistance as soon as humanly possible. I'll then also be coordinating with home care companies and assisted livings if that's what you're looking for. And then from there, once we get the Medicaid approval, we're submitting the pooled trust to Medicaid, making sure that they understand that no, we're not paying you this overage for your income. We're submitting in a pooled trust.
Okay.
So we set that up. And then the same kind of goes for a nursing home. Heaven forbid your loved one. Typically, I'd say 90% of my cases, usually somebody's already in the hospital or somebody's already in a rehab facility. And the family has made the just painstaking choice of like, this is just not possible for us to take them home.
Right.
And a lot of people always say to me, like, oh, I'm never, I get that 90, no, my calls is I'm not going, I'm not going.
Right.
Typically, just so you understand in terms of when we ever make that recommendation, you have to be able to be cared for by one individual person. So one person has to be able to lift you up. One person has to be able to help you walk. One person, because that's the only person. Well, Medicaid's only providing one human to
Right.
help you.
So if you
So
okay.
that's kind of if you need two people to assist you in bed, if you need two people to
Right.
help you get up. Not that it's unheard of that you come home, it's just usually a little bit more complicated in that scenario. And you're coming out of your own personal assets to make that happen.
Okay.
So
Cool. All right. And your firm is based in Levittown, right?
Levittown, yes.
Okay. And do you only work with clients in Nassau and Suffolk, or is it the whole state of New York? Kind of how does that work?
Um, we're it used to be just Nassau, Suffolk, 5 boroughs, but we're
Okay.
starting to get more and more people from Putnam counties, Westchester counties.
Okay.
So we do go beyond. The only time we ever run into any issues like up beyond that is just if there's anything that we have to appear in person. It's just
Right. It
obviously
becomes
not possible for
right.
us. So in that situation, that's the other thing about our firm. One beautiful thing that happened about with COVID is that we can help people. And we've actually found that Zoom has been so helpful
Sure.
with this particular population just because we had so many caregivers that said, listen, I don't have anybody to stay with them
Right.
while I come to this appointment. So what am I supposed to do? Where this allows not only for the caregiver for this to be a little bit more accessible, but we also now can get the person who's receiving the care more involved rather than have to have them stay at home because their medical situation required that. So those are really something that we assist with. And I just want to get back to, because I think I traveled away from it, just with the nursing home applications, we review all 5 years of statements.
Okay.
So all statements, open, closed, we review everything. And then we kind of give you, listen, this is what the story is.
Okay.
We're going to ask you questions and say, what was this transaction? What was this? We get very close. People text me. It's great.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's kind of the way that I work as well. So,
Yeah, exactly.
all right. Well, Chelsea, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining our
Absolutely.
very first interview with a professional series.
Exciting.
Although I may have to come up with a different name because it's quite frankly boring. But thank you so much for joining
Of
us.
course.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye now.